The morning coffee was still hot when Dr. Emily Watson's computer screen started flashing red warnings. She worked alone in the Deep Space Monitoring Station, a small building hidden in the mountains of Chile. Most people thought she was just another astronomer studying distant stars. They had no idea she was part of Earth's most secret defense program 3 days ago. Her sensors had picked up something impossible. 17 massive objects were moving toward Earth at incredible speed. They were slowing down as they approached the solar system. These were not asteroids or comets. The movement patterns were too controlled, too purposeful. Someone was coming to visit Earth, and they were bringing a lot of friends. Emily picked up her secure phone and dialed a number that very few people knew existed. General Robert Hayes answered on the first ring. His voice was calm, but Emily could hear the tension underneath. "How big are they?" he asked without saying hello. "Each ship is about 5 miles long. They're using some kind of energy field to slow down from light speed. The technology is way beyond anything we've seen before." The general was quiet for a moment. "Are you certain they're hostile?" Emily looked at her screen again. The alien ships were arranging themselves in what looked like an attack formation. "I don't think they're coming here to trade recipes." Across the galaxy, Admiral Korex stood on the bridge of his flagship, reviewing the intelligence reports about Earth. The planet was listed as a Level 2 threat, which meant the inhabitants were barely capable of space travel. Their weapons were primitive chemical rockets and crude nuclear devices. The report estimated that Earth's entire military could be defeated in less than 3 days. The Admiral found humans amusing. According to the intelligence files, they spent most of their time fighting each other over resources and territory. Their planet was divided into hundreds of different nations, each with its own military. They had no unified defense system and no real space-based weapons. "Admiral, we're approaching the target system," reported his communications officer. "Excellent. Begin the standard subjugation protocol. Send them our surrender terms in their various languages." The communications officer looked confused. "Sir, our linguists are still working on their languages. The translation software is having trouble with the complexity." Admiral Korex waved his hand dismissively. "Just send them something simple. Tell them to surrender or die. These primitive species usually understand basic concepts like that." Back on Earth, every major government received the same message at the same time. The transmission was crude and barely understandable, but the meaning was clear. The aliens were giving humanity 48 hours to surrender completely or face total destruction. President Martinez of the United States was in an emergency meeting when the message arrived. She looked around the room at her advisors and military leaders. Most of them looked terrified. Only General Hayes seemed calm. "Options?" she asked. "We could try to negotiate," suggested the Secretary of State. "With what leverage?" asked the Defense Secretary. "They have 17 ships that are each bigger than our largest cities. We have nothing that can even reach them." General Hayes stood up slowly. "Actually, we do have options. But I need to brief you on some classified programs that even you don't know about." The president stared at him. "What kind of programs?" "The kind that have been preparing for this exact situation for the past 30 years. Dr. Priya Sharma was deep underground in a facility that didn't exist on any official maps. She had been working on theoretical physics problems that most scientists thought were impossible. Her team had made breakthroughs in quantum mechanics, dimensional folding, and energy manipulation that made alien technology look outdated. The facility's computers were processing information from sensors hidden throughout the solar system. The aliens thought they were approaching a defenseless planet, but they were actually flying into the most sophisticated trap ever constructed. "How long until they reach optimal position?" asked Dr. Sharma. 36 hours, replied her assistant. "They're moving exactly as we predicted. Their formation is perfect for our countermeasures." On the International Space Station, Captain Tom Bradley was reviewing orders that had been sealed for 15 years. The space station that the public knew about was real, but it was only the visible part of a much larger structure. Hidden compartments contained weapon systems that had been tested in secret for decades. The aliens' sensors would detect the space station as a simple research facility. They would never suspect that it was actually a weapons platform capable of destroying ships much larger than their own. Admiral Corex watched Earth grow larger on his viewscreen. The planet looked exactly as described in the intelligence reports. Blue oceans, green continents, and a thin atmosphere. The humans had a few primitive satellites in orbit, but nothing that could pose a threat to his fleet. "Sir, we're receiving multiple communication attempts from the planet," reported his communications officer. "Let them talk. Fear makes primitive species more cooperative." The communications officer listened to the transmissions for a moment. "They're asking for more time to consider our terms. They want to negotiate." Admiral Corex laughed. "Typical. They always want to negotiate when they realize how hopeless their situation is. Tell them they have 48 hours, not 1 second more." Emily Watson was still at her monitoring station, but now she wasn't alone. Military personnel had arrived, with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. They were setting up systems that could track individual aliens on the enemy ships. "Dr. Watson," said a young officer, "we're reading 17 ships, but are there any smaller craft we should know about?" Emily checked her instruments. "No fighter craft, no scout ships. They're so confident that they didn't even bring escorts." The officer smiled. "Perfect. They have no idea what they're walking into." As the 48-hour deadline approached, the alien fleet moved into what they believed was the perfect attack position. They were close enough to Earth to use their most powerful weapons, but far enough away to avoid any desperate retaliation from the planet's primitive defenses. Admiral Corex was feeling pleased with himself. The humans had spent the last 2 days sending increasingly desperate messages. They offered to share their resources, their technology, even their cultural treasures. It was pathetic, but it was exactly what he expected from a species that had never faced real opposition. "Admiral, all weapon systems are charged and ready," reported his tactical officer. "Good, target their largest city. We'll make an example of them, then accept their surrender." The Admiral looked at the image of Earth on his screen. In a few minutes, the humans would learn what happened to species that were too weak to defend themselves. The Dominion had conquered hundreds of worlds exactly like this one. Earth would be just another name on a very long list. What Admiral Corex didn't know was that Earth had been on that list for 30 years. And for 30 years, the humans had been preparing for this moment. 2 miles beneath the Colorado mountains, Dr. Priya Sharma was surrounded by technology that would have seemed impossible just 50 years ago. The laboratory stretched for miles in every direction, filled with machines that hummed with energy that could power entire cities. This was Project Lazarus, and it had been humanity's greatest secret for 3 decades. The quantum computers around her were processing calculations that would have taken conventional computers millions of years to complete. They were analyzing every piece of data about the alien fleet, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. The machines had already found 17 different ways to disable the enemy ships without destroying them completely. "Dr. Sharma, the quantum entanglement network is online," reported her assistant, a young physicist named David who had been working on the project since he was 25. "We have instant communication with every major facility on the planet." Priya nodded as she looked at the holographic display showing the alien fleet's position. "Good. Activate the stealth satellites. I want to know everything about those ships before they get any closer." The satellites were invisible to conventional sensors. They used a technology that bent light and electromagnetic radiation around them, making them completely undetectable. The aliens had no idea that their every move was being watched and recorded. General Robert Hayes was in the command center of the Cheyenne mountain complex, but not the part that tourists could visit. This section was hidden behind blast doors that could withstand a direct nuclear hit. The walls were covered with screens showing the positions of assets that officially didn't exist. "General, all units are reporting ready status. said Colonel Martinez, his second in command. "The orbital platforms are armed and the fighter squadrons are standing by." Hayes looked at the tactical display. The alien ships were exactly where the computers had predicted they would be. "What about the International Space Station?" "Captain Bradley reports all systems are operational. The civilians have been evacuated to the emergency shelters." The general smiled grimly. The aliens thought they were approaching a defenseless space station with a few scientists aboard. They had no idea that the ISS was actually the most heavily armed platform in human history. Captain Tom Bradley floated in the command center of the real International Space Station, the one that existed in the shadow of the structure the public knew about. The walls were lined with control panels for weapon systems that had been tested in secret for 15 years. Around him, his crew was preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of humanity. These weren't astronauts or scientists. They were military personnel who had been training for this exact scenario since they were recruited into the Black Projects. "Captain, the particle beam arrays are fully charged," reported Lieutenant Sarah Chun, his weapons officer. "We can fire on your command." Bradley looked at the tactical display showing the alien fleet. They were moving in formation, confident and arrogant. Hold position. We wait for them to commit to their attack. The aliens had positioned themselves perfectly. They were close enough to Earth to use their most powerful weapons, but they were also close enough to be caught in the trap that had been prepared for them. Admiral Corex was reviewing the final attack plans when his science officer approached with a puzzled expression. "Sir, we're detecting some unusual energy readings from the planet." "What kind of readings?" "I'm not sure. There seem to be small power sources scattered throughout their orbital space, but our sensors can't get a clear lock on them." The Admiral looked at the sensor display. There were indeed some odd readings, but they were very faint. Probably just their primitive satellites. These species always have debris floating around their planets. The science officer didn't look convinced, but he nodded and returned to his station. If he had been able to see what the sensors were actually detecting, he would have been terrified. The faint power sources were actually massive weapons platforms that were using technology the Dominion had never encountered. Dr. Emily Watson was no longer alone at her monitoring station. Military technicians had filled the facility with equipment that could track individual life signs on the alien ships. They knew exactly how many enemies they were facing and where they were located. "Dr. Watson, we're getting detailed scans of their ship interiors," reported one of the technicians. "Each vessel has approximately 2,000 crew members. Their bridge sections are heavily shielded, but we can still penetrate them with our sensors." Emily studied the data. "What about their weapons?" "Standard energy beam arrays, nothing we haven't seen before. Their shields are strong, but they're designed to stop conventional attacks." The technician looked at her with a knowing smile. "Good thing we're not planning a conventional attack." In facilities around the world, similar preparations were being made. The aliens thought they were approaching a divided planet with no unified defense system. They had no idea that Earth's governments had been secretly coordinating their defense efforts for decades. The Chinese facility hidden beneath the mountains near Beijing was activating weapon systems that used gravitational fields to crush enemy ships. The European installation in the Swiss Alps was preparing energy weapons that could phase through any known type of shielding. The Russian base in Siberia was readying fighters that could travel faster than light. Admiral Corex received a final message from Earth just as his fleet moved into attack position. The humans were begging for mercy, offering to surrender without a fight. It was exactly what he expected from a primitive species that had never faced real opposition. "Admiral, we're in optimal firing position," reported his tactical officer. "All weapons are targeted on their largest population center." "Excellent. Fire when ready." The Admiral watched the main screen as his ship's primary weapon began to charge. The beam would destroy several city blocks in seconds, demonstrating the futility of resistance. After that, the humans would surrender completely. What Admiral Corex didn't know was that every movement his fleet had made was being tracked and analyzed. The humans had been studying alien technology for decades, and they had developed countermeasures for every weapon system the Dominion possessed. Dr. Priya Sharma was watching the alien fleet on her holographic display when the first energy beam fired from the lead ship. The beam was incredibly powerful, capable of destroying anything it hit, but it never reached its target. Energy shield activation confirmed, reported David. The beam has been absorbed and redirected. The shield that protected New York City was invisible to the naked eye, but it was one of the most advanced defensive systems ever created. It didn't just block the alien attack, it actually absorbed the energy and stored it for later use. Phase 2 is ready to begin, said Dr. Sharma as she watched the alien fleet's reaction to their failed attack. All units, you are cleared to engage. Around the world, weapon systems that had been hidden for decades suddenly came online. The aliens were about to learn that appearances could be very deceiving, and that the humans they had underestimated were far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The battle for Earth was about to begin, but it wouldn't be the one-sided massacre that Admiral Corax had expected. Instead, it would be a demonstration of what happened when someone picked a fight with a species that had been preparing for war for 30 years. The energy beam from Admiral Corax's flagship struck the invisible shield above New York City and simply vanished. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the shield began to glow with absorbed energy, turning the alien attack into a weapon that could be used against them. Admiral Corax stared at his tactical display in confusion. What happened? Why is the city still intact? His science officer was frantically checking his instruments. Sir, our weapon definitely fired, but the energy just disappeared? It's like something absorbed it completely. Before the Admiral could respond, his ship's sensors detected movement all around them. Objects that had been invisible suddenly appeared on the screens. They were surrounded by human ships that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Captain Tom Bradley activated the weapon systems that had been hidden inside the International Space Station for 15 years. The structure that the aliens saw as a simple research facility was actually the most heavily armed platform in human space. All fighters, launch immediately, he ordered. The IS suddenly came alive with activity. Hangar bays that had been invisible? To alien sensors opened up, releasing dozens of fighter craft that used technology the Dominion had never encountered. The ships could fold space around themselves, making them impossible to track or target. Lieutenant Sarah Chun was piloting one of the fighters, her hand steady on controls that could manipulate gravity itself. This is Fighter 1. I have visual contact with the enemy flagship. The alien ship was massive, stretching for miles in every direction. Its hull was covered with weapon systems and armor that should have made it invincible. But the humans had studied similar designs for decades, and they knew exactly where to hit it. Fighter 1, you are cleared to engage, came Bradley's voice over the communication system. Sarah activated her ship's phase technology and flew directly through the aliens' energy shields. The Dominion's defenses were designed to stop conventional attacks, but they were useless against weapons that existed in folded space-time. Admiral Corax watched in horror as human fighters appeared inside his ship's shields and began attacking his hull directly. How are they doing that? Our shields are at full power. His tactical officer was struggling to lock onto the human ships. Sir, the enemy craft keep disappearing from our sensors. They're using some kind of technology that we've never seen before. The Admiral's confidence was beginning to crack. This was supposed to be a simple subjugation mission against a primitive species. Instead, his supposedly invincible fleet was being attacked by enemies that could appear and disappear at will. Dr. Priya Sharma was coordinating the battle from her command center deep underground. The quantum computers around her were processing information faster than any alien technology could match. Every human ship was connected to the network, giving them perfect coordination and instant communication. All orbital platforms, you are cleared to fire, she announced. Around Earth, weapon systems that had been hidden for decades suddenly revealed themselves. Asteroids that had been hollowed out and converted into battle stations opened up, revealing massive energy cannons. Satellites that had appeared to be simple communication relays activated particle beam arrays. The aliens found themselves under attack from every direction. Their sensors had completely failed to detect the true extent of Earth's defenses. What they had thought was a helpless planet was actually a fortress that had been preparing for this battle for 30 years. General Robert Hayes was watching the battle from his command center, but he wasn't celebrating yet. Status report on the enemy fleet? Sir, we've disabled 6 of their ships and damaged 8 more. 3 ships are trying to retreat, but our fighters are staying with them. Hayes nodded grimly. What about their flagship? Captain Bradley's teams are working on it. The ship is heavily armored, but we're getting through their defenses. The general looked at the tactical display. The alien formation was falling apart as human fighters darted between the massive ships like deadly insects. The Dominion's weapons were too slow and clumsy to hit targets that could bend space around themselves. Admiral Corex was getting desperate. His ship was taking damage from attacks that seemed to come from inside his own hull. Human fighters were phasing through his armor and hitting critical systems directly. All ships, fall back to defensive positions, he ordered. Sir, we can't retreat, reported his communications officer. The human ships are faster than us and they're jamming our jump drives. The admiral stared at the tactical display. Half of his fleet was either destroyed or disabled. The other half was trapped in Earth's orbital space, unable to escape and unable to fight effectively against an enemy they couldn't even see coming. Send a message to the Dominion High Command, he said quietly. Tell them we need immediate reinforcements. Sir, our long-range communications are being jammed. We can't reach the fleet. For the first time in his career, Admiral Corex felt real fear. He had led the Dominion fleet in dozens of successful conquests, but he had never faced an enemy like this. The humans weren't just defending themselves, they were systematically destroying his forces with technology that shouldn't exist. Captain Bradley was leading a strike team inside the alien flagship. His soldiers were using portable devices that could phase them through the ship's hull, allowing them to appear anywhere inside the vessel. The alien crew was completely unprepared for enemies that could walk through walls. Captain, we've reached the engine room, reported Sergeant Davis over the communication system. The alien power systems are more primitive than we expected. Bradley smiled as he made his way toward the bridge. Good. Plant the charges and move to the next objective. The human soldiers were moving through the ship like ghosts, disabling critical systems and capturing alien crew members. The Dominion forces were trained to fight conventional battles, not to deal with enemies that could appear anywhere at any time. Dr. Emily Watson was still monitoring the battle from her station in Chile. The sensors were showing her something. That would have been impossible just a few hours ago. The mighty Dominion fleet was being completely defeated by human forces that had been invisible until the moment they attacked. Dr. Watson, we're receiving surrender signals from 4 of the alien ships, reported one of her technicians. Emily looked at the display. The alien fleet was in ruins. Most of the ships were either destroyed or disabled, and the few that remained were trying to surrender rather than continue fighting. What about their flagship? Captain Bradley's team is on the bridge. They should have control of the ship within minutes. Admiral Corex was sitting in his command chair when the human soldiers appeared around him. They had simply walked through the walls of his bridge as if they were made of air. His security forces were helpless against enemies that could phase through solid matter. Admiral, said Captain Bradley as he removed his helmet, I think we need to talk. The Admiral looked around at his bridge crew, all of whom were staring at the human soldiers in shock. How did you get through our defenses? The same way we've been preparing for this battle for 30 years, replied Bradley. We knew you were coming and we've been getting ready. Admiral Corex felt the weight of his failure settling on his shoulders. The intelligence reports about Earth had been completely wrong. The humans weren't a primitive species that could be easily conquered. They were a dangerous enemy that had been hiding their true capabilities until the moment they chose to strike. What do you want? He asked quietly. Bradley smiled as he looked around the alien bridge. First, we want you to call off any reinforcements that might be coming. Then we want to have a long conversation about the other worlds your people have conquered. The Admiral realized that this battle was just the beginning. The humans hadn't just defended their planet, they had captured his fleet and all the intelligence it contained. They now knew everything about the Dominion's military capabilities and their plans for future conquests. Earth had not only survived the attack, it had turned the tables completely. The species that had been dismissed as primitive and helpless had just demonstrated that they were far more dangerous than anyone in the galaxy had imagined. Admiral Corex sat in the interrogation room aboard his own flagship, now under human control. The room looked the same as before, but everything had changed. Captain Bradley sat across from him, along with Dr. Priya Sharma and General Hayes, who had arrived via transport that could cross interstellar distances in minutes. "Your intelligence files were remarkably inaccurate," said Dr. Sharma as she reviewed the data they had extracted from the alien computers. "According to these reports, Earth should have been conquered in 72 hours. Admiral Corex looked at the humans with a mixture of confusion and growing fear. "Our scouts spent months observing your planet. Your technology was primitive. Your military forces were divided and you had no space-based defenses," General Hayes smiled grimly. "Your scouts saw exactly what we wanted them to see. We've been broadcasting false information about our capabilities for decades." The Admiral's eyes widened as he began to understand the scope of the deception. "You knew we were coming?" "We've known about the Dominion for 30 years, replied Captain Bradley. "Ever since your people attacked the Kepler system and we intercepted their distress calls." Dr. Sharma activated a holographic display showing the timeline of human preparations. "The survivors from Kepler reached Earth in damaged ships. They told us about the Dominion's expansion pattern and warned us that Earth would eventually be targeted." Admiral Corex stared at the display in shock. The Kepler attack had been classified at the highest levels of Dominion command. Very few people knew about the refugees who had escaped. "That's impossible. We destroyed all their ships." "Almost all," corrected General Hayes. 3 ships made it to Earth. The crews were dying from radiation exposure, but they lived long enough to share their knowledge with us. The holographic display showed images of the alien refugees working alongside human scientists. They had provided detailed information about Dominion technology, military tactics, and expansion plans. Most importantly, they had helped humanity understand how to fight back. "The Keplers weren't the only ones," continued Dr. Sharma. "Over the past 30 years, we've been contacted by survivors from 17 different worlds that the Dominion conquered. Each group brought new information and new technology." Admiral Corex felt sick as he realized the implications. The Dominion's conquests had been creating refugees who were spreading information about their weaknesses throughout the galaxy. Earth hadn't just been preparing for one attack. It had been building a network of resistance that spanned dozens of star systems. "The quantum entanglement communication system we used during the battle," said Captain Bradley. "That came from the Centauri refugees? The phase shift technology that let our fighters pass through your shields? That was developed by scientists from the Vega system." The Admiral was beginning to understand why his supposedly invincible fleet had been defeated so easily. The humans hadn't just been preparing for 30 years, they had been learning from every species the Dominion had ever attacked. Dr. Emily Watson entered the room carrying a datapad filled with information that had been extracted from the alien computers. "Admiral, we've been analyzing your fleet's mission records. You've conquered 47 worlds in the past 10 years alone," Admiral Corex nodded slowly. "The Dominion brings order to chaotic systems. It's a necessary service." "Is that what you call genocide?" asked General Hayes coldly. "Because that's what your mission records describe. Complete extermination of any species that refuses to submit." The Admiral looked uncomfortable. "Resistance is futile. Species that cannot adapt to Dominion rule are eliminated for the greater good." Dr. Sharma leaned forward. "What about the species that did submit? What happened to them?" "They were integrated into the Dominion as worker populations. They serve the greater good by providing resources and labor. Captain Bradley activated another holographic display. You mean they were enslaved? We've been in contact with some of these integrated populations. They're not happy about their situation. The display showed images of alien species working in mines and factories under Dominion control. The conditions were harsh and the workers were treated as property rather than sentient beings. The Dominion maintains order, insisted Admiral Corex. Without our guidance, these species would destroy themselves through war and chaos. Like we were supposed to? Asked General Hayes. Your intelligence files claim that humans were constantly fighting among themselves. That we were too divided to mount an effective defense. The Admiral nodded. Your species does have a history of internal conflict. Dr. Sharma smiled. That's true. But we also have a history of coming together when faced with external threats. The Dominion's expansion gave us a common enemy, and that unified us in ways that peace never could. She activated another display showing the hidden facilities that had been constructed around the world. Every major nation contributed to the defense project. We shared technology, resources, and personnel. The threat of conquest made us stronger, not weaker. Admiral Corex studied the display in amazement. The humans had built a global defense network that rivaled anything the Dominion possessed. Facilities on every continent were connected by quantum communication systems that allowed instant coordination across the entire planet. How did you hide all of this from our scouts? He asked. Captain Bradley grinned. We didn't hide it, we disguised it. Every military installation was built to look like something else. The orbital weapons platforms were disguised as research satellites. The fighter bases were hidden inside fake mining operations. Even the International Space Station was a deception, added Dr. Sharma. The structure your scouts observed was real, but it was just the visible part of a much larger weapons platform. The Admiral felt a growing sense of despair as he realized how completely the Dominion had been deceived. The humans had spent 30 years preparing for this moment, and they had done it so effectively that Dominion intelligence had never suspected the truth. What happens now? He asked quietly. General Hayes looked at him seriously. That depends on what you're willing to tell us about the other worlds the Dominion is planning to attack. Dr. Emily Watson consulted her datapad. According to your mission files, there are currently 17 species under assault by Dominion forces. We'd like to help them. Admiral Corex looked at the humans with new understanding. They weren't just defending their own planet, they were planning to intervene in conflicts across the galaxy. The species that had been dismissed as primitive and divided was about to become a major military power. You're planning to fight the entire Dominion? He asked. We're planning to stop the Dominion from conquering any more worlds, replied Captain Bradley. The network of refugee species that helped us prepare for this battle is ready to become something more organized. Dr. Sharma activated a final display showing star charts with multiple systems marked in different colors. Green systems are ones where we've already made contact with resistance movements. Yellow systems are ones where we have intelligence about ongoing conflicts. Red systems are ones where we believe genocide is currently taking place. Admiral Corex stared at the display in shock. The humans had been building a galactic intelligence network while the Dominion had been focused on individual conquests. They knew more about the current state of the galaxy than most Dominion commanders. The refugees who helped us prepare weren't just sharing technology, explained General Hayes. They were sharing information about their home systems and the resistance movements that still exist there. The Admiral realized that the Dominion's policy of conquest and enslavement had created the very enemy that was now threatening their expansion. Every world they had attacked had created survivors who were willing to help others resist. What do you want from me? He asked. Complete intelligence about Dominion military capabilities, ship positions, and planned attacks, replied Dr. Sharma. In exchange, we'll guarantee the safety of your crew and allow you to witness what happens when someone picks a fight with a species that's been preparing for war for 30 years. Admiral Corex looked around the room at the humans who had just defeated his fleet with technology that shouldn't exist. He was beginning to understand that the balance of power in the galaxy was about to shift dramatically, and the Dominion was on the wrong side of that shift. 6 months after the failed invasion of Earth, Admiral Corex stood on the bridge of a human starship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The vessel combined technology from dozens of different species, creating a ship that was faster, more powerful, and more advanced than any Dominion vessel. "Admiral, we're approaching the Altair system," announced the ship's captain, a human named Rebecca Stone who had been chosen to lead the first Joint Resistance Fleet. "Long-range sensors are detecting 12 Dominion ships in assault formation around the fourth planet." Corex studied the tactical display with new eyes. He had been working with the humans for months now, helping them understand Dominion military doctrine, while learning about the resistance network that had been growing throughout the galaxy. The experience had changed his perspective completely. "The Altarians have been fighting for 3 months," he said. "According to the intelligence reports, they've managed to evacuate most of their population to hidden colonies, but their military is running out of supplies." Captain Stone nodded. "That's about to change. All ships prepare for a coordinated assault. Remember, we want to capture as many Dominion vessels as possible." The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace was unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. The ships used technology that could phase through enemy shields, weapons that could manipulate gravity and time, and coordination systems that allowed perfect tactical synchronization across multiple star systems. Dr. Priya Sharma was aboard the flagship, coordinating the attack through quantum communication networks that connected resistance movements on 47 different worlds. The isolated rebellions that the Dominion had been crushing individually were now part of a unified military force. "Dr. Sharma, we're receiving communications from the Altaran Resistance," reported the communications officer. "They're requesting permission to join the assault." "Granted," replied Dr. Sharma as she watched the tactical display. "All resistance forces, you are cleared to engage." The Altaran ships that emerged from hiding were small and lightly armed, but they were coordinated with the human fleet through quantum communication systems. The Dominion forces found themselves facing a combined assault from enemies that could communicate instantaneously across vast distances. General Robert Hayes was monitoring the battle from Earth's command center, but he was also coordinating similar operations on 17 other worlds. The network of hidden facilities that had been built to defend Earth was now being used to support resistance movements across the galaxy. "General, the Vega system offensive is proceeding as planned," reported Colonel Martinez. "The Dominion forces there are completely surrounded." "What about the Centauri liberation?" "Complete success. The Dominion garrison surrendered after we demonstrated our new gravitational weapons. The Centauri refugees are already returning to their home system." Hayes looked at the galactic map showing the positions of human fleets and resistance movements. In 6 months, the situation had changed completely. The Dominion was no longer expanding. It was retreating from systems it had held for decades. Captain Tom Bradley was leading a strike team aboard one of the Dominion ships in the Altair system. His soldiers were using the same phase shift technology that had proven so effective during the invasion of Earth, but now they were applying it to liberation operations. "Captain, we've secured the bridge," reported Sergeant Davis. "The Dominion crew is requesting terms of surrender." Bradley looked at the alien officers who had been commanding the assault on Altair. "The same terms we've offered to every Dominion force. Complete withdrawal from conquered systems, release of all enslaved populations, and cooperation with the Galactic Resistance Network." The Dominion commander looked confused. "You're not going to execute us?" "Why would we?" asked Bradley. "Half of our fleet commanders are former Dominion officers who chose to join the Resistance. Admiral Corex is coordinating this entire operation." The alien officer's eyes widened in shock. "Corex is working with you?" He realized that the Dominion's expansion was creating the very resistance that would eventually destroy it, explained Bradley. Every world you conquered created survivors who were willing to help others fight back. Dr. Emily Watson was aboard one of the support ships, analyzing the data being collected from each liberated system. The intelligence network that had started with refugees from Kepler had grown into a galactic communication system that could coordinate military operations across hundreds of light years. "Dr. Watson, we're receiving updates from the liberation fleets," reported her assistant. 17 systems have been freed in the past month. The Dominion is withdrawing from 12 more without a fight. Emily studied the galactic map on her screen. The red zones marking Dominion-controlled space were shrinking rapidly, being replaced by green zones where resistance movements had taken control. What about the core systems? Still heavily defended, but we're detecting increased communication. Traffic. The Dominion High Command is starting to panic. The Dominion had ruled through fear and overwhelming force for centuries, but they had never faced an enemy that could coordinate resistance movements across the entire galaxy. Their strategy of divide and conquer was useless against an enemy that could communicate instantly across any distance. Admiral Corex was in the war room of the human flagship, working with officers from dozens of different species. The room was filled with beings who had once been enemies, now united by their shared goal of ending Dominion expansion. The intelligence. "Reports from the core systems are encouraging," said Commander Thel, a Centauri officer whose family had been enslaved for 20 years. "Dominion recruitment is down 70% and they're facing mutinies on 17 different ships." Corex nodded as he studied the reports. The Dominion military was built on the assumption that resistance was futile. When that assumption proved false, the entire system began to collapse. "What about the enslaved populations?" asked Captain Stone. "Liberation fleets are already en route to the major slave worlds," replied Corex. "The Dominion doesn't have enough ships left to defend all of their territories." The irony was not lost on him. The Dominion's policy of conquest and enslavement had created a vast network of people who wanted revenge. When the humans provided the technology and coordination to make resistance possible, the entire empire began to crumble from within. Dr. Priya Sharma was receiving reports from resistance cells on worlds that had been under Dominion control for decades. The quantum communication networks that connected these groups allowed them to coordinate uprisings with military support from the liberation fleets. "Dr. Sharma, we're receiving a priority message from the Dominion High Command," announced the communications officer. "Put it through." The holographic display showed a Dominion leader who looked exhausted and defeated. "We wish to discuss terms for a general ceasefire." Dr. Sharma looked around the war room at the representatives from dozens of different species. "I'm afraid you're talking to the wrong person. The resistance network doesn't have a single leader." "Then who do we negotiate with?" "Everyone," replied Captain Stone. "Every world you conquered, every population you enslaved, every species you tried to eliminate. They all get a voice in what happens next." The Dominion official looked confused. "That's impossible. How can we negotiate with hundreds of different groups?" Admiral Corex stepped forward. "The same way the humans coordinated the defense of their world, through technology that allows instant communication across any distance. Every resistance movement in the galaxy is connected to this network." The official's face went pale as he realized the implications. The Dominion had always negotiated from a position of strength, using their military superiority to dictate terms. Now they were facing an enemy that could coordinate the demands of every population they had ever oppressed. General Hayes was monitoring the conversation from Earth's command center. The planet that had been dismissed as primitive and helpless was now the coordination center for a galactic resistance movement that included hundreds of different species. "General, we're receiving surrender requests from 47 different Dominion outposts," reported Colonel Martinez. "They're requesting safe passage to the core systems in exchange for releasing their enslaved populations." Hayes looked at the galactic map. The Dominion's expansion had been completely reversed in less than a year. Systems that had been under Their control for decades were now free, and the Empire was contracting back to its original borders. What about the liberation fleets? All objectives have been achieved ahead of schedule. The last slave world was liberated 6 hours ago. Captain Bradley returned to the flagship after completing the liberation of the Altair system. The planet that had been under assault for months was now free, its population returning from hidden colonies to rebuild their civilization. Captain, how are the former Dominion officers adapting to liberation operations? Asked Captain Stone. Bradley smiled. Better than expected. Most of them are grateful to be fighting for something other than conquest. Admiral Corex has been particularly effective at convincing other officers to join the resistance. The transformation had been remarkable. Officers who had spent their careers conquering worlds for the Dominion were now leading liberation fleets that freed enslaved populations. The change in purpose had revitalized many of them. Dr. Emily Watson was compiling the final intelligence reports about the state of the galaxy, the network of resistance movements that had started with a few. Refugee ships had grown into a civilization that spanned hundreds of star systems. The transformation is complete, she announced to the assembled leaders. The Dominion has withdrawn to their core systems and agreed to release all enslaved populations. The galaxy is free. Admiral Corex looked around the room at the beings, who had accomplished something that had seemed impossible just 1 year ago. How did you know it would work? Dr. Priya Sharma smiled. Because we learn from history. Every empire that has ever existed has eventually fallen when it became more expensive to maintain control than to allow freedom. The Dominion just happened to pick a fight with a species that accelerated that process. General Hayes activated a final holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. The red zones marking Dominion territory had been replaced by a complex network of free worlds connected by quantum communication systems. The resistance network isn't disbanding, he announced. It's becoming something new. A galactic alliance, dedicated to preventing any future attempts at conquest. Captain Stone looked at the display with satisfaction. So, the species that was supposed to be conquered in 72 hours ended up liberating the entire galaxy. Not just liberated, corrected Admiral Corex. United, the Dominion's expansion created connections between species that would never have met otherwise. Their attempt to conquer the galaxy ended up bringing it together. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the magnitude of what had been accomplished. Earth had not just defended itself, it had transformed the entire balance of power in the galaxy. The species that had been dismissed as primitive and powerless had proven that sometimes the greatest strength comes from those who appear weakest. The Dominion had picked a fight with what they thought was a helpless world. Instead, they had awakened a force that would reshape the galaxy forever. It had been, as the humans might say, a very big mistake.